So for today, uh, we will basically talk about how to identify good evidence, which is basically what we are talking about when we say that we are coming across conflicting points of view. So how do you know what to uh, take from an article? How to break it down for your audience and using research to support your arguments. So in today's day, misinformation is such a big confounder, even when you're conducting research. So it is very important to know what sources to trust, what literature to follow through, what sometimes you can fall into a rabbit hole, and that can get difficult. But it is important to stay objective. Sometimes we can have our own points of view that we believe in, but it is important to uh, look at things from both sides. Like Parth said in his last session, we do have our own views, but while writing, it is important to also consider what objections or what oppositions that can have, and building it into your research as well so that you can use those arguments to put your point across. So if you look at, say, any regular article, let's look at this one. I'm sorry. Has everyone gone through the article that I sent on the chat? Like, shout out to Pavani for bringing lymphatic filariasis into the conversation, because we are just going to start with the mass drug administration soon. So this is definitely something that is going to be talked about for the next few weeks. So if everybody could just open that article, you will see that most of the article just quotes government data. And for most of our research, you'll find that, ministry documents and national programs will suffice to put your point across. For instance, say you're writing about lymphatic filariasis. If we look at this article, it starts with, as Parth said, a story which humanizes the topic and allows you to connect with what is being said. It talks about lymphatic filariasis and then about Santosh, who then talks about his lived experience with filariasis. And then this goes on to refer to the accelerated plan for lymphatic filariasis elimination, and then quotes WHO data, and then the Indian government's MDA programs. So, as you can see here, the crux of the matter can be built using a lot of objective data. It doesn't have a lot of opinions. The opinions can be formulated by what you see. So, here in this article, as we can see, uh, it quotes the government's objectives of elimination by 2027, and then goes on to talk about the current MDA requirements and whether or not that is achievable within the given time span. So, if anybody has any ideas or how they feel about the research that they see in this article. Okay, then we'll just move ahead. So, most of journalistic writing will be supported by government data, census, ministry documents. Other than that, you'll have WHO, UNICEF, World Bank, IMF data. You'll also have other articles. So, when you first come across a topic, it is best, as Parth said, to go to the news section and look at what has already been written, because that will give you a very good idea of the kind of dialogue that already exists around that. After that, you go into your particular niche in that topic and look into what uh, research exists to bolster your own arguments. For example, this is an investigative article by the same India Spend website. This is UP Shravasti has fewer primary health centers than the norm. And the writer here did an investigative article into 11 primary health centers in UP and talked about the lack of infrastructure and human resources and compared it to the latest district data and the IPHS standards, the Indian Public Health Standards, which are set. So, if you look here, you can see that they simplify it for the layperson and, sorry, ensure that people can understand what the problem is. So, if you look at the topic, it is about primary health centers not meeting government norms. So, the writer first talks about going into the place and seeing the ground reality, then talks about the district data available, then talks about the Indian public health standards. He simplifies all of this to make all of it palatable to your general audience. And then you see it was not over, the only PHC that was not overburdened among 11 was just one. So this the first couple of paragraphs which open this article, you can see that they are short, don't have a lot of they're not very data heavy, but they already pique your interest. So your research should be minimal but pique your audience's interest. So we already have spoken about the government data that we can use. Let's talk about journal articles because I think this is the part where most of us struggle. So we already, I think, know about the hierarchy of evidence. Too many articles, don't know how to compile them in one space. So that is the thing. We don't need to compile all of the articles. Say you have, let's take the example of TB and uh, multi-drug resistant TB and nutrition. So you have the rations trial, which recently happened, and that alone can be your bolstering argument. Why? Because in the hierarchy of evidence, it was a clinical field trial, which gives you a very strong evidence, and that can be your talking point. You don't need to go into every article. So when we speak of hierarchy of evidence, we need to understand that so our randomized control trials or in field trials will have a very strong will give us a very strong talking point and allow us to make our case.
Yeah, so I think what Radhika said, I actually agree with it in the sense that किसी एक topic के बारे में अगर there are a bunch of studies that are there, then it's okay to sort of decide कि कौन सा study you want to quote and कौन सा study you don't want to quote. And for that, we look at this pyramid, जिसका top में, as I mean, at the top of that, there is systematic analysis and meta-analysis, which look at a lot of studies that have been done on the topic, and they synthesize the evidence into what it predominantly says. So these are at the top of the pyramid. These are the best evidence possible that exists for a particular topic. So we need to look at that as a primary thing. And then otherwise also any randomized control trials जिसमें people have done interventions and seen evidence, that is something that you can prefer as a second line. And I think Radhika's screen got stuck. Now she's back. So I'll let her continue.
Hi, I'm so sorry. I just lost connection there for a second. So, yes, I was addressing Dr. Deepika's query. And like I said, you don't need to go to every article. You need to find the strongest article that supports your point. And for that, like Christianis said, you find systematic reviews and meta-analysis or clinical control trials, and they are your best bet. Often, when you see news headlines that say, like, for example, recently you had the articles about HIV being miraculously treated in 5 people. Those are not very strong arguments because where would they fall in the hierarchy of evidence? They would be case reports or case series. And they do not form a very strong base of evidence because they are not replicable. They are not generally inclusive of different populations. And the generalizability of those that evidence is poor. So wherever possible, look for meta-analysis, systematic reviews. In public health, it is sometimes difficult to do that, especially with newer or novel innovations. But always ensure that your audience knows the strength of the evidence that you're talking about. For example, you might want to report on that HIV story, but it is important to uh, educate your audience about the strength of that evidence. You can frame it by saying that this treatment worked in this one case. However, the evidence for it working for more people is yet to be found and is being worked upon. So, sorry. Yeah, so the question mark here talks about observational studies. And mostly you'll come across observational studies which will give you associations of different variables, which are the most common kind of studies done. And sometimes you'll find journalists claiming that this causes X causes Y out of observational study reports. And that is poor journalism because no observational studies can ever give you causality. And as medical journalists, it is imperative that we remember this. So do not ever make strong claims of causation where there are only observational studies or case control studies, because you cannot ensure causality in these studies. So, what are the words that you can use instead? They may be linked, they may be associated. Caffeine intake has been seen or may cause a lowered risk of heart disease and mortality. But you can't say that people who consume caffeine have been seen to have lower mortality, because stronger claims can be misleading and are considered unethical in general. So I'll quickly share one PDF, and we don't have to read the whole thing. We can just skim it, but we'll then look at these articles. And I think that's an easier way, hands on, to understand how to critically analyze an article. Just a second.
A very nice point you mentioned about how not to make these very strong claims, Like sometimes you open the newspaper and then you see these articles that say, like, HIV can be cured now, and that's just very irresponsible reporting. It's important to really interpret the data with a pinch of salt, and it's very important to kind of not peddle these things to people.
Absolutely, because what happens is we are the ones who can understand or are equipped to understand the hierarchy of evidence. But like Parth said, the general audience you have to aim at does not have a background in STEM, does not have the ability to judge the evidence or its hierarchy, and will take your article at face value. So that is the great burden of journalism, and that is something we have to be cognizant of all the time. So I'm so sorry, I'll just quickly share the PDF and we can all quickly take 5 minutes to go through it. Yeah. So this is an article about the prevalence and associated factors of tuberculosis among diabetic patients attending public health facilities in Ethiopia. So, if I'm going through this article to write about tuberculosis in diabetes, I can quickly go through the abstract and see that it's a multi-center cross-sectional study done for around 12 months among diabetes patients in Ethiopia in 5 centers. So the consecutive diabetes patients more than 15 years of age were screened for TB, and those with signs and symptoms suggestive of TB were enrolled. So I'll stop everybody right here and ask you if you see anything wrong with this methodology.
Is it the
Like,
age? Like,
there are no wrong guesses. Like, can we just like, so just a hint, like
you wrong.
in diabetes, like you will not, because of the immunosuppression, you'll not necessarily always have TB symptoms, even if you are infected. So, right when we look at the methodology, they screen for TB symptoms, and those whose symptoms were suggestive of TB were enrolled. And in this particular population with diabetes, that may not be the best methodology because we might miss out a lot of patients who have no clinical signs and symptoms. After that, we can just look at the other things, patient-related socio-demographic, uh, behavioral and clinical data were collected. All of the uh, tests we can see were done thoroughly. There was smear microscopy culture and uh, expert RIF ultraassay was also conducted. So all of that is great because that is good research. So then we can look at the results. 652 of the 14,000 patients screened were found to have presumptive TB, which means that they were having clinical signs and symptoms suggestive of TB, after which 73 of them had TB. All right. And then we can look at the independently associated factors, which was younger age group, cough lasting for more than 2 weeks, cigarette smoking, contact with a known TB case, and HIV seropositivity. Okay, great. So, right or without reading the entire article, I found that they had a really good and stringent diagnostic criteria. The associated factors that they looked at, and it's an age, the adjusted odds ratio. They used adjusted odds ratio, which means that they probably looked at a lot of confounders and adjusted for them. And we can see that biologically, the biological plausibility for all of these factors, I'm so sorry, is strong. So I'll just go to the next part. So they look at these clinical characteristics, and without looking at the clinical characteristics, could everybody just like answer in the chat box and tell me what confounders would you want to look for in such a study if you didn't know what the study was doing? I'm sorry, I'm going to be asking a lot of questions. I don't like talking as much.
So they were trying to find out in patients with diabetes what associated factors were there that with a TB diagnosis, right?
Yes. Yes. So
Somebody
going
said
in,
smoking. That
yeah,
in the chat box, people are saying either socioeconomic conditions,
absolutely.
smoking, level of
Yes,
glycemic control,
absolutely. So
whether
as
alcohol intake.
yes. So they have used other proxy indicators of economic status, which are education and employment status. And
Mhm.
they have uh, like they did smoking, alcohol, specific drugs. And one other important thing they looked at was HIV serostatus. However, the other thing that they haven't done is that they didn't screen these patients, and they didn't really know how many of them, the negative patients, had been screened. So that is another little thing, but it's a very minor thing. This is a very well done study, actually. And you can see that they have looked at almost every confounder you can think of. There is the kind of diabetes medication taken, the follow-up time for diabetes, and the glycemic control, the kind of medication taken. They have also looked at the follow-up status, whether the patients were regularly or irregular in following up. And they also looked at COVID history and hospitalization history. So this was this is the odds ratio table, and sorry, sec. Yeah, you can see that they have looked at age group, cigarette smoking, known contact with TB, diabetes follow-up, type of medication, and glycemic control.
Somebody's asking, was this done for drug sensitive TB or drug resistant TB?
Yeah, they don't mention that. Again, that is a very good point. I will share this PDF later on, and you can look at it and we can have a chat about some other factors as well. So, overall, this is a good article. The research is robustly done. They have uh, detailed their methodology and talked uh, their data quality assurance has been talked about. The labs that they did their testing have been detailed. They have, however, not mentioned any conflicts of interest. And this study is not funded as well. So that is another thing that we need to look for. So, one important thing which you need to look at right before you get to the abstract is the conflicts of interest and the funding for the study, especially when it comes to drug testing. Because as we look at in the next paper, uh, drug testing is something which is very murky and can get murkier because of the competing interests of the funding authorities. Often, drug testing is funded by pharmaceutical companies, and they would, have a vested interest in showing positive data over negative data. It is also important to remember that what gets published and what was researched are not always the exact same data set. Positive findings are more likely to be published. And this is something we have to remain cognizant of, especially when it comes to newer drugs and newer interventions. So let's quickly look at the second article. Yeah, hemoptysis is missing. That's a good point. I think what they looked for was hospitalization, but yeah, hemoptysis is probably one of the things that they screened for in the clinical signs and symptoms. But again, in patients who have diabetes, that may not always be the case. Patients were on insulin or oral uh, hypoglycemics, and that was also taken into consideration. Nutrition was taken into consideration. Alcohol intake, yes. Other comorbidities were. Odds ratio always gives exaggerated response. Yes, which is why they used adjusted odds ratio, but even that needs to be taken with a pinch of salt, which is correct.
They've done a multivariate logistical regression also, no, to
Yes.
ensure that the confounders are.
Yeah. I'll quickly share a link to the next one so that everybody can follow easier.
Yeah, I gave Radhika that article, and it's got like a history because my husband got called to present this by in a conference, and like he had just taken me along for fun, and I pointed out so many things going wrong in that article in public. I never gotten invited after that.
So you're not getting that sweet, sweet pharma money anymore.
No, no.
So I hope everybody's able to look at this one. This one is shorter as well, so it'll probably be easier for everybody to just quickly look at it. I'll just give everybody 2 minutes to quickly go through it and see if they can find some glaring errors in ethical or methodological points in this. Information is very unclear. Yeah, I would like some more specifics. Yes, as Kusum pointed out, retinoid group can be teratogenic, and they have not mentioned whether or not they asked women of reproductive age group whether or not they were planning to get pregnant or their pregnancy status. Uh, if we look at the subject age group, they have not talked about consent or assent for children because the age group is 9 or above as well. So that is another ethical quandary that we can look for. Yes, it doesn't specify gender either. Yes. The age group is very extensive, and the causes for acne from 9 onwards can be different. So it just says above 9 and gives us the median age group of around 19 to 20. And that doesn't give us a lot of information about the study population, which again raises questions about the general uh, results that we find. What? Yes, so operational definitions are missing. That's great. Now, some good points are that they talk about, they specify different races and different ethnicities and skin phototypes, which can be important confounders. So let's look at the efficacy and safety data. Have we gotten there?
I can't wait for you guys to get it. Kusum has pointed out that the outcome assessment tool has also been like made by the investigators, and that's kind of not validated. Very fair. Like you can't make standards and say this meets my own standards.
As Nandita also pointed out, the type of moderate acne is not specified. The type of irritation or tolerability is also not specified. There are no operational definitions, and it is just defined as by investigator assessment, which is not sufficient.
Can anyone think of anything else? Radhika, is it mentioning ethical permissions or registration under drug trials? Kahin? Oh, I think Radhika's net is acting up again. I'm not sure, but then yes, they have to mention it. If you guys have this link open, I would just like you to go all the way down and see the author acknowledgements and tell me who these people have acknowledged as investigators. Can you hear me? Um, yeah, you can hear me. Please go all the way down and look at the acknowledgements and please tell me who they have acknowledged. Yes, they have acknowledged Galderma. And that is such a big conflict of interest. When you open a drug trial and you're thinking of quoting it, the first thing you need to look at is who's funding this study and what conflict of interest. And if there's a pharmaceutical company ka naam, just trash that study. Don't quote it. Like it's not going to be objective at all, and they're going to manipulate the data to say what they want to say. Now, on top of this, there are two other major glaring methodology issues that I thought was like alongside whatever you guys have pointed out, including like them making their own outcome measure. The first one being that when you compare a new drug, you have to always compare it to the existing standard of care. You cannot take something like acne, which has a standard of care, which is isotretinoin, and say, I'm going to compare my new acne drug to a placebo. You can't say that my new drug is better than nothing. That's just not done. Like, so in terms of things which have already has standard of care, superiority trials are not okay. You have to do non-inferiority to standard of care trials. So that was one thing that I noted that was a big issue here. And the second thing is how pricey is triferritin. If you look at it, it's like 5 to 6 times the price of standard of care. So if you're going to tell me that instead of isotretinoin I should prefer prescribing triferritin, then it's being better than nothing is just not enough. It has to be better than the standard of care in like, multiple ways, and it has to like really have a unique selling point, which I didn't think was there. So these were my issues with this study, and obviously, of course, because Galderma also sponsored it. I think Radhika is back. I'm so sorry for taking your screen time.
No, and thank you, Christian, is because I think I lost connection and electricity at the same time. So, yes, like Christian has said, the first thing that we need to look for, which was a hint I had given just in the last one, that before we read the abstract, just straight up go to the conflict of interest and funding part and look whether there are any conflicts there. Most of the authors work for Galderma. The entire thing is funded by Galderma. So, uh, in most cases, it is better to look for independent researchers rather than funded ones because there is a conflict of interest which is bound to come up. And secondly, non-inferiority trials are always the choice of investigation for drugs for drugs where an existing treatment is known to be effective and is the treatment of choice. And this is going to be very important in especially vaccine therapies, where we should look critically at rotavirus vaccines or cervical cancer vaccines because we'll see more and more vaccines coming up. And often those studies are done similarly. They do not compare them to existing vaccines and just compare them to, a placebo. And that is not how efficacy trials should be run. So, as medical journalists and as doctors, it is imperative that we recognize these red flags as soon as we see them in a study and make them clear to the audience as well. So, while writing about this, even if we need to necessarily talk about an article like this, it should be made clear to the audience that uh, even though this study was conducted and showed that this new drug is effective, number one, this drug was not compared to existing treatments which are available freely in the market. Number two, this drug is more expensive than the drugs currently available in the market. And number three, most importantly, these drug tests were run by the companies which manufacture the same drugs. Transparency is something that can often be difficult in scientific research, which is why medical journalism is so important because it breaks down the barriers and makes this research accessible. And that is our duty as writers to ensure that happens. Okay, so going back to the presentation. So another thing that we need to look for is the source of the article. With more and more predatory journals coming up, there is a lot of falsified evidence that exists out there. So, if you come across an article from Lancet or BMJ, that is fine. But if you look at an article that doesn't have a known publisher, which has a name like International Society for Medical Specialties or International Journal for Science Research, you should probably go back to the journal's website, look for their indexing and their impact factor. If they do not have any of that in their homepage, then you might want to take their research with a pinch of salt. And again, what are the claims? As we looked at the Galderma paper, the claims are scientifically accurate, but they don't take into consideration the treatments which already exist or the cost efficacy to the patients, which are very important factors, often not looked at in clinical trials. And conflicts of interest, even though is the last point here, should be the first thing all of us should look for. So this, I think we already did. Now, when we are breaking down results for our readers, always remember that the language we used here, superiority trials, non-inferiority trials, efficacy, may not be accessible to your reader. So these terms have to be broken down. You might take like 2 or 3 sentences to convey what you would in a phrase, but that is preferable because your terminology should not obscure knowledge from your reader. So let's again go for a few exercises. So if you read an article where the result says, compared with women who reported 0 cups of coffee per day, women who consumed 6 or more had a 22% lower risk of diabetes. How would you interpret that for your audience? Like you can just write it in the chat box. Uh, Women of reproductive age group, let's say. Absolutely, it can have confounders. But uh, if you have to like interpret this for your audience while making them aware of all of these things, how would you do it? Women who consume more coffee are less likely to have risk of diabetes. Okay. Women who had more than 5 cups of coffee per day may be linked to lower link of diabetes. Okay. Lower risk of diabetes with more cups of coffee. It has been seen that coffee intake may lower the risk of diabetes.
I like that people are using the operational word may or might. That's kind of very nice.
Exactly. So, with sentences like this, it is very important to convey to your audience that there might be an association. Increased consumption of coffee might increase the risk of, yeah. So, ideally, we would want to say that women who consumed more coffee had a lower risk, were seen to have a lower risk of diabetes than women who didn't drink coffee in this study. Because and then you can go on to the details of the study. Because sometimes we tend to report what happens in a study as something, as just a statement, which makes it look like it can be generalized to the entire audience. However, that decision is up to you as the journalist to ensure whether or not that is generalizable in the first place. Increased. Uh, the second one is univariate analysis showed an association with mortality for the following variables: diagnosis of infection on admission, presence of cancer and cardiovascular pathologies as comorbidities, evidence of tachycardia, hypertension, and hypotension. So, how would break this down? Like you could do a little dance, but we would also want to break this down.
Hmm. Presenting as bullet points, says someone.
Okay, how would you present this as bullet points? Because, like we said, a 12th graduate might not know what univariate analysis means. So we would need to explain that as well.
I love that you put this sentence because, like, the minute I read that, I got a little bit of anxiety. And this is the best way to tell people how not to write. Like, in your articles,
Exactly.
please don't write sentences like this.
Yes, absolutely. Like, because people don't want to open a news article and get bombarded with things that they would need to Google. So
Mhm.
just ensure that you have everything in there that your average 12th graduate needs, non-science 12th graduate.
Can I go? Like, I might write it as a study checking association with risk factors show that people are likelier to die if they were admitted with a diagnosis of infection.
Yes, but
And
an
then maybe a
analysis,
follow-up sentence saying,
yes,
maybe a
okay,
follow-up
Janice.
sentence which
Yeah.
says that the other things that might predispose them to have worse outcomes are like whether they have cancer or any heart disease,
Yes. So an analysis
or whether
showed,
they're
I would encourage more people to answer. Analysis of various factors showed that there was increased risk of death. An analysis showed that factors like comorbidities and diagnosis were linked to mortality. Yes. Studies show association of death. So yes, it is important to always talk about study, that this particular study, yes. And instead of univariate analysis, we can say that it was seen in this study that death rates were higher in people who had an infection and admission, had pre-existing cancer or heart disease, or any signs of other heart conditions instead of tachycardia, hypertension, and hypotension. Yes, I think uh, while Akshay's response comes a close second, I think Dr. Deepika has done a good summarization of this. Nandita says a study showed that there may be a link. Yes, we want to stay away from terms like link because when people hear link, they think cause. We want to talk about association, so we like using words like maybe, link, maybe is a very good word, or might be, can be, associated with, and we can say link, but we would like Oh, yes, there is a maybe. Sorry. Maybe link between death and factors like presence of cancer, pre-existing cancer, and heart conditions. Yes. So I think everybody is doing very well. Thank you, guys. And I think the last one is a little harder because we go to multivariate logistic regression analysis, which showed an independent association between mortality and cancer with odds ratio 2.31 and a 95% confidence interval of 1.34 to 3.98. So I don't know about you guys, but as soon as I see like all the numbers and initials, I get a little bit flustered, and I wouldn't want to do that to my readers. So I try to take some time and make it easier for them. And that's what we all should aim to do in our writing. So let's do this last one quickly. So I would just quickly like to point out that we need to keep in mind that this is a multivariate logistic regression and there is an independent association. Last one, guys, let's just get done with this.
Like what I want to say is if you have cancer, you're twice as likely to die as someone without cancer. Those are not claims one should be making, though.
Yes. A study finds that those with cancer are twofold likelier to die than those without cancer. Yes. A study showed the high predictability of death with cancer patients, almost double than those without diagnosis. Yes. So I think we all got the memo and we are doing pretty good, guys. I mean, this is the point. So these are, say, some examples. I would just like to explain some caveats that we should be cognizant of, which we should explain to our patients. For example, model studies are all the rage right now, but whenever we are talking about modeling studies, it is important to tell your reader that the findings are based on hypothetical relationships which may not exist. So you don't necessarily need to use this sentence, but you need to convey this to your reader that this has been found in modeling studies which may or may not be translatable in real life, or which the ramifications of which in uh, real life settings are yet to be seen. Again, with small studies, we need to say that they come from a small study. We need to highlight that it's a small population and larger studies are always better. With novel interventions, we need to tell our readers that it is based on short-term data, and we need to wait for phase 4 data to know more. And self-reported data always has the caveat that patients would have a social desirability bias and maybe not report everything. So these are things that we take for granted when it comes to medical research article reading, but these are things which need to be conveyed to our reader and something things we need to be cognizant of as well. So yes, we begin by looking up our topic and our sub theme. You look in two places. The first is, of course, the news and news articles, and then you go into scholarly articles. I would always suggest doing that in that or this in that order because the news articles give you an idea of what is being talked about, and which is going to inform, number one, what you can pitch, and number two, where you can pitch it to. And due diligence is important. Even when you're relying on news articles from credible sources, do not just take what they are quoting at face value, because what they are quoting might have changed since that time. And number two, it is always best to go back to the original data source. And you always use research points to bolster your arguments. You might say that TB is a huge problem in India, that lymphatic filariasis may not be eliminated by 2027. But your reader needs to know why you are saying this. And you can do the research to make sure your point is coming across well. And at the end, I'll just say that your ethical obligation comes first and foremost. So, whenever you are researching, no matter what your bias is, make sure you read every paper with skepticism. Always look at the conflicts of interest, always look at funding before you go to the abstract. Do not ever sensationalize your topic. Do not say miracle cure or inositol can cure PCOS or miracle cure for HIV, because while that can get you more readers, that is just unethical and doesn't make for good journalism. You should always explain the caveats of your topic to your reader, which we discussed. Whether it is a modeling study, whether it was a small population, it should be made known to your reader, because these are the things which make misinformation so rampant today, which is why you have a lot of people who are educated but believe a lot of pseudoscience due to the glut of information which is not complete. And always remember, when you're reading scientific articles, that positive findings are much more likely to be published. And this is something you need to keep in mind as well while talking to your readers. So, thanks, guys.